first thing we always have to mention is that we give out the It's Probably Not Aliens challenge coin to return guests. And this is our third return guest.
I think so.
Our third guest to come on for a second time.
Yes.
Whoa.
The honor.
And also probably one of our favoritist of like well-received guests from the elder days of It's Probably Not Aliens 2. I think you're one of our first guests.
Really? Oh, thank you. It's an honor.
Like our
to
second
be back.
guest.
Yeah, we're excited to have you back. I love the first
wild.
episode we had you on was so much fun, and we're bringing you back on for demand to have you back on the show.
Yeah. For anyone who doesn't know, who we've got back is Trey the Explainer, who also goes by the nickname on the internet as the Archaeology Twink.
That was a nickname thrust on me. I did not decide that nickname, but I'll accept it. Thank you.
Somebody mentioned it in like the comments on an episode of the podcast. I sent it to you and you were like, this is the funniest shit I've ever seen.
My dad has seen that. Like, my dad follows me on, thankfully he doesn't follow me on Twitter. He follows me on YouTube. And so when I posted like something about like subscribers, like, thank you so much for doing it. Somebody he's like, I saw somebody post like the archaeology twink or something like that. He's like, I don't know what that means. And I was like, oh no.
That feeling when you have to explain to your dad what a twink is.
Yes, I was like,
it's a cool thing. Don't worry, it's a compliment. Don't worry about it.
It's a cool guy who does cool things.
Yeah, that's all you need to know.
All the kids are doing now these days.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And just like, he'll be like, yeah, my son's doing great. He's a YouTuber. He's a twink. He's all over the place. He's doing great.
Just bragging about it to
He's
people
like church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Oh my goodness. But yeah, Trey, for those who haven't listened to the episode that we did like almost 2 years ago at this point, would you like to tell the good people who you are and what kind of stuff you do? Which I know is also a kind of a complicated question.
Because I talk about anything now. I'm Trey the Explainer. I make videos on I mainly make videos on like archaeology stuff and history stuff now, but I occasionally drift off into like other territories, whatever like interests me at that time. And yeah, I was on for talking about Nephilim last time, which was really fun.
Yeah, because you have that you did a bunch of, in your early days, you did a bunch of like debunking a lot of like literalist stuff in the Bible, because I think you have like a background in like evangelical stuff, and you did a lot of stuff about like debunking creationism and all that kind of stuff in the early times when I first found you, back when, now that I have learned that you were like 12 or something.
Back when I was a child. Yeah, and I still do that. I still love learning about like biblical history and how to understand like biblical text, and I'll try to go back in there. Like in those videos do really, really well because they attract crazy people who help with the algorithm, I guess. So you should go back to it. They're fun.
My most popular video is debunking the 9/11 truth movement, and the video has not stopped getting views in almost a year.
Oh my god.
Even with new releases, it's almost exclusively like my most popular video every month. And it just leaves me with this constant barrage of the absolute most insane and very anti-Semitic comments.
No.
And then we're recording this. This is coming out in October, but we're recording this like 3 days after the 9/11 anniversary, when it turned 22 years old, which also just like, oh my God, I felt my bones creak at that one. But that day I had to like dedicate like almost like 2 hours to just fumigating my comment section of just the most horrific anti-Semitic bullshit you'll ever see.
No good.
I like using fumigating like they're like bed bugs in your house. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Okay, we're all YouTubers here, and I want to point out that the greatest feeling in the world, like the most, like the feeling that like I get genuine joy doing this, is when you see a comment by some sort of crank or asshole or somebody who's being a jerk, who wrote paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs getting mad at you, and just like Scott Pilgrim, you're like, this looks really boring, and then just ban them, and that all that work never sees the light of day.
Oh yeah. Like YouTube's ability for like the creator to like delete comments they don't like is fantastic. It's like, I don't like this, I'm deleting it, because like on Twitter or something like that, you can like block or mute somebody, but their comments are still there. And it's like, no, I can delete your comment.
Yeah.
I also like that you can delete the comment, but like they don't know, and also mute them for all time, so they're just constantly commenting into the void with nobody hearing it.
No one hearing it.
Yes.
Mwah, chef's kiss. It's one of the just when I see a super long comment that you can tell they spent a lot of time writing, and you just know that it's never going to see anybody. It's just like, love it. I also to start the podcast, I also wanted to talk about another thing that I thought was very amusing, and I feel like Trey, as the combination of Zoomer and archaeologist, you might find this very amusing in a way, and I feel like we would all have some good stuff to weigh in. So, currently absorbing on TikTok, the app that the kids are using.
Yeah.
The app that me, as the oldest person of the three of us, uses probably the most, but is for the kids or something.
I love TikTok.
I have no idea. Trey might be a TikTok.
I don't even have a TikTok.
There you go.
See,
I'm so old.
I love TikTok. I love when people repost TikToks to Instagram Reels so that I can see them, because I don't go onto the TikTok app. But I like the TikToks themselves. I just don't watch it on TikTok.
I like when people put their Instagram Reels on TikTok, because
The reverse.
I don't know why, but it feels like my brain is actually physically allergic to Instagram. I have everyone seems to love it and loves posting on it and loves looking at it, but I have never gone on Instagram and been like, wow, I want to keep being on this app. I hate it. I hate everything about it. It's I don't know. Anyways, so what happened is this Facebook post went out a few months ago of this woman who was just thinking, like, who asked her boyfriend, I think, she asked her boyfriend, hey, how often in a day do you think about the Roman Empire? And without missing a beat, he replied, every day. And it has been followed up with women all over TikTok asking their male partners, hey, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? And being shocked to find out that it's basically constant.
That is awesome.
Wow.
That is like the funniest thing ever.
The one I just saw before the show started is this woman who was married to a man for 16 years. They had never once talked about the Roman Empire. And then she decided to, based on this, to ask. And he said, well, like, no more than like once a week. And she's like, once a week? Like,
it's like once a week for 16 years. I never knew.
And like women are like, I never anticipated that he would think this much about the Roman Empire.
So do we have to like sort of round robin, like how much do we each think about the Roman Empire? Because
sure. Although we have to skew that Trey is literally an archaeologist student or an archaeology student. So
it's like every day.
Every day. That makes sense.
I don't know. It's such a big part of history too. It's like, I don't know. It's hard to not talk about or think about the Roman Empire.
That makes sense.
How about you, Scott? How often do you think about the Roman Empire?
Never once in my life have I thought about the Roman Empire. Am I going to be the odd one out? Tristan, how often do you think about the Roman Empire?
I'm having a really hard time answering this question for really stupid reasons, because like, I don't like, if I were to say like, how much do I think about like Caesar Augustus crossing and like the crossing of the Rubicon and like crap like that, which I know Caesar Augustus didn't cross the Rubicon. That was Caesar, or Julius Caesar or whatever. But either way, that stuff I don't think about very much, but I very often think about how much like Rome is like super duper duper relevant for understanding history. It's like I always mention things about like why does Russia do a lot of the shitty imperialist stuff it does, and it's because of this like long history of Russians considering themselves the inheritors of the Roman Empire, and that they like literally the word Tsar comes from Caesar, and like Kaiser comes from Caesar, and like those kinds of things. Even like the American Capitol buildings are all designed around a Greco-Roman thing, because America's whole experiment in republicanism was all meant to be like, hey, we're going to find a way to make the success of the Roman Republic work without having the descent into tyranny that led to the Roman Empire. And so like that's like there. That's like the stuff that is there. That is like the way that I think about that kind of stuff. But like honestly, like I could not give two shits about like the Punic Wars or Caligula or Nero or the Vomitorium or gladiatorial games or any of that kind of stuff. Like
the fun stuff though. That's the fun stuff I love. I know what you mean about like things having impact, like all the medieval empire, like kingdoms were like the successors to and saw themselves as the successors to the Romans. And then like Christianity, probably a big reason of why it's so popular and became dominant is like because the Roman emperor converted to it. and stuff like that is like, yeah, it makes these big impacts. I don't know. I like thinking about like alternate history stuff. So like, it's always fun to like think like, okay, how if things ended up a little bit differently. I don't know.
Like there's like a handful of times where like there's one time where a Roman emperor found Jesus and it changed the entirety of human history. Like one dude decided to be like, hey, I'm into this Jesus thing. I'm going to base my entire personality around it. And it basically was the beginning of the end of the Roman Empire and also changed the entirety of Western history. Christianity would almost be like a Middle Eastern religion at that point if it wasn't for that, or a Middle Eastern North African religion if it wasn't for one guy deciding that this is my whole personality now.
Oh my gosh.
Although I think that I know that some classicists is going to be like, well, you know, Constantine actually did that because it was a political decision because he was trying to okay, yeah, I get it.
What I'm hearing is you do think about the Roman Empire way more than I do, even if it's not the whole thing.
It's true. I find myself thinking, weirdly enough, for some reason, my Roman Empire seems to be like the USSR, mostly because I'm reading a World War II book right now. But I, for some reason, probably more than any healthy human should, think about Stalin and like the Soviet project a lot.
Gosh. Well, speaking of Stalin, I feel like that's enough Stalin this episode.
Oh,
you see?
This is a podcast called It's Probably Not Aliens, a podcast where we talk about pseudo-history, pseudo-archaeology. 12 minutes. That's actually decent for us.
That's not bad.
Yeah.
Pseudo-history, pseudo-archaeology, UFO cranks, conspiracies, but we tend to buttress the show around ancient aliens.
Yes.
The more and more quotation marks around history channel.
History,
every single take.
Yes.
My name's Scott. I know nothing about what we're talking about today.
That's different. That's my name. My name is Scott. I know nothing. I don't even think about the Roman Empire that much, which makes me feel like I should. Should I think about it more often?
Think about Rome more.
I should
Scott think about Rome more. Send a tweet send an X to @ProbsNotAliens on X to say whether or not Scott should think more about the Roman Empire.
Yeah, let me know.
Also, if you are a person with a male partner and you are not male yourself, you should ask them how much they think about the Roman Empire and report back with your findings. Scientific. This is a scientific study.
But who are you actually? Yeah.
My name's Tristan Johnson. I do the research to make these episodes happen all the time, and I progressively drive myself insane because I have somehow decided to dedicate my life to debunking conspiracy theories and showing its connections to the basically general destruction of society. Luckily, the reason I asked for Trey to come on the show today is because Trey, when I was researching this, one of the first things I do is try to go on YouTube to find out what the cranks are saying about the thing. I looked up Utsuro-Bune, the topic of today's episode, and the number one result is Trey's video on the topic.
Oh, that's awesome.
Woo.
And it's also the only non-UFO video on the subject.
Yes.
Oh, amazing.
I made that like 5 years ago or something crazy like that. It's going to make me old. How old is the video? It's been a while. And yeah, like I remember when I made it, I was like literally the only one on YouTube who was not talking about like just nodding their head saying it's a UFO. I was like, actually, you'll have to listen to the rest of this podcast.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Ooh, good tease.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's delve a little bit into
what
ancient aliens and ancient astronaut claims about what Utsuro-Bune is. And for the record, everybody, if you are a person who can correctly pronounce things in Japanese, sorry, that's all I can say.
Yeah.
Japanese does not come easy to me. So here's the idea, is that millions of people around the world believe that there was a local fisherman in the province of Hitachi who spotted an unusual drifting craft on the water. And the craft was apparently in the shape of an incense burner. But if you look at a Japanese incense burner, it kind of looks like a flying saucer.
Oh.
The exterior of the craft had small metal plates on it that were similar to heat-resistant tiles found on space shuttles. Ooh.
Oh.
Space shuttles.
Because they got to go through the atmosphere and that's hot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which also reminds me that I didn't talk about this in the episode, but metal plates that were like heat-resistant tiles found on space shuttles. The heat-resistant tiles on the space shuttles were not metal. They're like a ceramic thing.
Oh, yeah.
And like literally the bottom of the shuttle is this like ceramic, like high space age material that can handle like extreme friction heat.
Yeah.
I might remember because I was personally traumatized by this event when I was a child, but like about 5 months after 9/11. So Tristan was like, I want to say like 13 years old. What happened was one of the shuttles took off and scraped against one of the struts holding it onto the fuel tank and knocked off just a few of these tiles. Then on re-entry, that led to a cascade effect. And basically over the Texas sky, the shuttle blew into a billion pieces, just showing how dangerous space actually is.
Yeah.
Like that happened like less than 6 months after 9/11. And so I remember like that was still the time when everybody was still glued to watching 24-hour TV. So I remember everyone was like obsessed with this thing. It's like only the second shuttle to have like ever gone down, but it was a huge thing.
Yeah.
And I was 13, so obviously I watched the news constantly because I'm normal. Yep. I'm a normal, insane
That's what
person.
a normal 13-year-old does.
All that is to say is that the tiles are like a ceramic or something like that. They are not like metal.
Gotcha.
A lot of the rest of the ship is metal. Like it's made out of like titanium and stuff, but like the stuff that's actually designed to be heat resistant to the atmosphere is like ceramic.
Yeah.
Oh, we're talking about a story now. In this floating UFO thing in the water, inside was a young woman dressed in unfamiliar clothing and speaking a language that nobody could understand. As we know, space is full of human women.
Yes. That's what Eric Von Daniken always says. His whole thing was like, once we land on a planet, we are going to find the women and we are going to have alien babies with them.
I am literally mid listening to the episode that you did behind my back while I was at VidCon, where you guys get extremely unhinged talking about that book.
He was so obsessed with this idea of like, when we find aliens, we are going to have sex with them. Like, guys, that's just what's going to happen.
I base my entire idea of life in the universe on what Captain Kirk would do.
That's like way more true than people realize though about Eric Von Däniken.
Yeah, because just like we found out in like, Chariots of the Gods, he straight up plagiarized H.P. Lovecraft. So like, fiction was like his primary source of inspiration. Anyways, inside the craft, they found these strange writings and hieroglyphics that nobody could understand. And over 3 different Japanese texts, we get this story of Utsuro-Bune is the nickname for this story. Modern historians, according to Ancient Aliens, modern historians struggle to understand what it means. It also suggests that Utsuro-Bune would mark that extraterrestrials did visit Japan in the ancient past and connect it with other incidents of mysterious figures showing up in Japanese, mythological history and doing weird and supernatural things and then disappearing. And maybe this is just another part of that story. So that's the general, that's what millions of people around the world believe.
Yeah. So it's clearly aliens. Yeah.
It's clearly aliens. Utsuro-Bune, alien, confirmed.
Confirmed.
Do you think I did that well enough, Trey?
Yeah. I think you got it. Like most of the details about, I guess, so I watched a little clip of an Ancient Aliens episode. I don't know if it's the same one as this, where it gave the Utsuro-Bune story, and their version of it, it was not good. I was like, this is so stupid. Because they give narration, and I watched it, and they straight the editor at least straight up lies, where they have the hollow ship, when they say it leaves, they have it fly off into space, and then and stuff, and gas comes out, and I'm like, that just straight up didn't happen in the original story.
He was just making shit up, bud.
Somebody's lying.
Yeah, Utsuro-Bune though is definitely I wouldn't say it's a fixture. You have to be pretty deep in UFO lore to get to Utsuro-Bune.
Yeah.
But it is definitely if you are into UFOs, Utsuro-Bune is a story that comes up of hey, this looks all like a flying saucer and all that kind of stuff. And maybe this is an example of that, especially because we talked about as UFO people have tried to because Trey, I don't know if you know this, but a lot of the UFO people have struggled because there's this interesting correlation between the rise of sightings of UFOs and flying saucers and basically the widespread popularity of science fiction on television.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So a lot of these projects are trying to show that there's obviously more to it, and it's not just that science fiction influenced people and people saw things in the sky and made those connections erroneously, but that it's actually part of a deeper thing. And Ancient Aliens and the History Channel and a lot of UFO people in general will rely on the fact that their primarily conservative, right-wing, and American fan base don't know Japanese, don't know the subtleties of Japanese culture or folklore, and won't do a whole lot of research learning an entire new language in order to understand a story in context. So
What? That
They
doesn't
won't
sound
look
like
up the
them.
date of the story. They won't look up the date of the story and realize it's not ancient and is in 1803.
Yeah. We'll get into this, but so here's now we're gonna go into like the actual legend about how it's written.
Okay, yes, please.
How it's written, like how it's actually like the actual story of Utsuro-Bune. So on February 22nd, 1803, fishermen on the coast of Harayadori in Hitachi saw a strange vessel drifting in the sea, and they towed it to land and found that it was about 3.3 meters high and about 5.45 meters wide.
Okay.
I did not do the imperial conversion.
That's fine. Meters, I just, in my head, they're so close to yards that I can sort of figure that out myself in my head.
It's roughly 3, so it's about 4 feet tall and about like 5, 10, 15.
That can't be right.
17 feet wide.
Okay. 4 feet tall. That doesn't make sense from 3.3 meters.
Sorry. Yeah, 10 feet tall.
There you
3.3, right? Yeah. And it was the way that they described it was that it looked like a kohako, which is a Japanese incense burner.
Cool.
Now, if you've ever seen a kohako, if you were to imagine, if you had seen a UFO before, you would kind of imagine it as a UFO shape. It does kind of have that disc shape. The way that it works is you put it on the table like that and you put sticks of incense in the top and light them. So
yeah,
I've also heard it described. There's one of the stories says it's like a rice basket.
Yeah, there's another good case. Yeah. So the upper part of the vessel, instead of being made of apparently like, atmospheric reentry tiles or whatever, actually seemed to, in the description, seem to be made from red lacquered rosewood and the lower part covered in metal plates. And that the vessel had windows made of glass or crystal that had been covered with bars and sealed with some kind of tree resin. Not stuff that would be unfamiliar to Japanese people, especially because Japan is a series of islands and has a very big maritime culture. So it's like it's a big deal. They go into big detail about the boat's craft and construct because their culture at this time anyway put a lot of emphasis on boats and stuff.
Yeah.
Inside, they did find that there's text written in an unknown language.
Oh.
And inside they find other alien artifacts like bed sheets, a bottle filled with 3.6 liters of water, and some cake.
Ooh.
Oh, and meat. So food.
And meat.
We got some meat,
Kneaded
some
meat,
cake.
as described.
All right.
Alien cows.
Yeah.
We know from previous episodes, aliens love abducting cows. So
I would love to see, and I'm sure someone has made this, like some sort of like skit where the aliens are convinced that cows, because they're more numerous, are like the dominant species on the planet, and that they're like they're going to war against the cows, trying to conquer the planet.
We are the cows' servants because we're taking care of them and everything like that. So the humans are not important. It's the cows we got to figure out what's their deal.
Cows have a culture of humiliation. They make the humans drink their milk.
Yep.
As if they are children.
They're like our hive mind. The cows are like the queen and we're like the worker ants all around them.
Yeah, exactly. Inside the vessel, they find a woman between the ages of 18 and 20 who has red hair and elongated eyebrows with artificial white extensions. Now, I will mention that like if you were to see this from like a Japanese cultural perspective, a woman with red hair is like seen to be like, oh, that's weird and exotic, right?
Uh-huh.
She also had skin that was a very pale pink color, so, like basically a white person, and had long, smooth clothes of an unknown fabric, and spoke an unknown language that the fishermen did not seem to understand. Now, at this point, I think it's important to point out that, like, one of the things that the ancient aliens people would be like, well, what could this possibly be? Because the Japanese wouldn't have known what a European person looked like. And I'll mention that Japan first had its contact with Europeans in the year 1545. And also at this point, the West was actively in pursuit of colonizing China. So Japan did have, did know about Westerners. In fact, the end of the Sengoku Dai period, this was like a big civil war that happened in Japan. Literally, there was like a big war where like they had all their like samurai warriors and stuff, but they got eventually the Oda clan took over the country because they were like, interesting katanas you've got there. We found some guys who gave us guns.
Is that something Ancient Aliens says? Is that it can't be like a Western lady or European lady?
Well, they don't. They kind of Ancient Aliens, I don't think talks into it, but that is like they don't explain why that like this mysterious woman could not just be a European and they have to go to alien.
That's weird because that's something that's brought up actually in the original story that like the Bakken, like the author is like, oh, it's probably a British or American princess.
Yeah, something like that.
That's his theory. He mentions that in the story.
Because again, as we've talked about, this is not ancient history. This happened in 1803,
That's
right?
weird.
So, yeah, it's so weird.
The other thing that she had on her was something called a quadratic box.
Okay.
And that this box was made of a pale material about 600 centimeters wide or about 2 feet wide, and would not let anybody touch the box despite multiple requests.
Don't touch it. It's my
An
special
old
box.
man from the village theorized that this could be a foreign princess who had an affair and was set adrift as a punishment, and that the quadratic box might hold the head of the deceased lover. But eventually, not giving in to the mysteries, the townspeople decided to return the woman and the vessel to the sea and let her drift away. And that is the key part, remembering like that kind of aspect of the story, because that's basically like the moral of the story that Ancient Aliens very interestingly doesn't talk a whole lot about.
No, they want to treat it like it's a real, so they
have her fly away in a spaceship.
Have her fly away.
Instead of dumped in the ocean like trash.
Yeah.
So I want to give you guys a little bit of context about this.
Please do.
There are 4 different versions of the Utsuro-Bune story that exist in the Oshukuzaki, which came out in 1815, the Toen Shosetsu, which came out in 1825, the Hyoryu Kishu, which came out in 1835, and the Umenochiri, which came out in 1844. And first, let's talk about like a couple things. One, mysterious women. Mystery and mysterious women are often figures that show up in Japanese folklore. A mysterious woman showing up out of nowhere who has supernatural abilities or origins come up all the time, because mystery and mysterious things that the mortal world don't understand is a big part of Shinto spirituality. And Utsuro-Bune being like, oh, this mysterious woman who came in from the ocean, it fits very well into this like model of Japanese folk story.
Women, man. What are they about? What do they want? It's a mystery. We'll never know.
The other thing that is important to mention is that she's carrying a quadratic box, and quadratic boxes.
Yeah, what is that?
They have a specific significance in Japanese culture. So a quadratic box is basically like, I think it's just like a perfectly square box.
Cool.
The way that it's been translated, quadratic box means something. So that's like a big part. So the thing is, though, that like a box like that, a square box like that, like
nice
a cube,
square box,
right?
A nice cubed box. Yeah.
The concept of a mysterious, untouchable object could be likened to the fact that those sort of shapes of boxes can also be used in Japanese culture for holding sacred or cursed items in various myths and legends in Japanese history. Usually these boxes hold significant power or secrets that are not meant to be tampered with. That's another big part of Japanese folklore, is that,
don't touch it.
Again, with mysteries, secrets and mysteries that mortal people are not supposed to be messing with.
What's in the box? I'll never tell.
If you're a fan of Japanese horror, you'll know a lot of the sort of presage of the things that set off a Japanese like horror story is usually messing with something that you don't understand, that you should not be messing with.
Don't touch it. Yeah.
So that is this is another part where like the quadratic box has significance in the story. There's another example of what we could talk about with the quadratic box is a guy who by the name of Urashima Taro, who is the protagonist of a Japanese fairy tale called Otogi Banashi. He's a fisherman who's rewarded for rescuing a turtle and carried on its back to the dragon palace beneath the sea. There he's entertained by the princess Otohime as a reward. He spends what he believes to be several days with the princess, but when he returns to his home village, he discovers that he has been gone for at least 100 years. Remember, I talked about this in an episode before because this is one of the first time travel narratives ever made.
I remember this. Yes.
Yeah.
Time travel forward, yeah.
But what happens is that he's given a forbidden jeweled box called a tamatabako. They said, you must never open it. And so he kind of like, the story is about him going around and exploring the world of 100 years in the future. Eventually, though, he does open it, and basically the 100 years of time passes immediately, and he turns into an old man.
Just withers away into dust.
This is like a very common like fairy tale model in Japanese culture. You might remember a certain version of it as somebody else who got transported 100 years in the future and has to see the state of the world around him. In a little story called The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild.
Got transported 100 years into the future.
And if you like look at the art style, like especially of like those robots in Breath of the Wild, you'll see like a lot of like, obviously Nintendo and Zelda is all made in Japan.
Yeah.
But there's in the Zelda series, there is a lot of homage to Japanese fairy tales, and especially things like even the robots or guardians or whatever they're called have like inspiration in like really old Japanese sort of pottery and arts that comes out. I know because we're probably going to have to do an episode about this later, because ancient astronaut people have looked at those and also assumed that those are spacesuits. So
there you go. They did another version of that in Tears of the Kingdom, where this time it was Zelda who was in the past and had to find a way to travel to the future. But this one was more sad and heartbreaking, and I won't spoil it for anyone, but it's cool and sad, and it made me cry.
I'll get to play it sometime. Right now, I am so deep into Baldur's Gate, and also I have a very hard time playing console games. Like, it just I spent so much of my life never having a console.
Yeah.
That, like, the concept of like, hey, I'm going to go play a video game, to me is like, I'm going to go to the computer. It's not going to be, I'm going to go pick up the thingy and play the thingy.
Fair enough.
Like, my wife got a Switch in 2017. The last console that I had before that was a PlayStation 2.
I hear you.
The other aspect of this story and context that's super important is the ship. Hollow ships like that, actually boats and ships in general, have a significant symbolism in Japanese folklore, often as vessels for spirits meant to travel between worlds. Oftentimes, the ocean is referred to in sort of, if you want like a sort of more Western comparison, kind of like the Grey Havens in and the sort of in the Lord of the Rings and like the Middle Earth mythos, where like when it is the symbolic version of dying, especially like immortal things dying in Middle Earth, is going to the Grey Havens, which is traveling to the west and going on a boat that sails off into the metaphorical sunset. Yeah. So like the ocean and these kind of boats have this symbol in Japanese folklore that are about this connection between the world of the living and the world of the spirits. I'm getting some serious Princess Mononoke vibes and stuff like that, because it's all based on the same mythological, spiritual sort of milieu.
It's interesting when you look into the context of the culture that you're talking about, you uncover a lot more stuff that's maybe more relevant than just saying it's aliens, I think.
Another thing too, like this shows up in Western canon even more often, because I can think about like how often the idea of like the process of dying and going to the afterlife involves getting on a boat and, you know, giving Charon money to ride the Styx into the underworld type stuff.
That's true.
But yeah, so the ship has that significance as well. The other part that's a big part of this fairy tale, that's kind of its like moral lesson, is the returning of the woman to the sea. Various Japanese myths are about mortal people having an encounter with supernatural beings, fairly often beings that are called yokai, which in Japanese, specifically Shinto spirituality, are like spirits, various types of spirits. And in Shinto like myth, yokai can be of everything. Like this, they can be the spirit of the mountain, they can be the spirit of the forest, they can be, you know, fox, like kitsune spirits. And like, although kitsune is just the word for fox, but like there's this whole idea that kitsune are all kind of semi-spiritual creatures.
Yeah.
And again, to give our primarily American audience a little bit of like a comparison, think about like Studio Ghibli stuff with like the big one that comes to me is Spirited Away, where the main character crosses over into the world of the yokai, and like there's different spirits for all sorts of different things. They all have different looks and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
How am I doing, Trey?
Oh no, I think it's good. There's another interesting thing where there's a legend in Japanese folklore that is much older, that dates to the 7th century AD. And it's the origin story of the Kono clan. And it's like eerily similar to this story, even though it's older, where a fisherman finds a 13-year-old girl in a hollow ship drifting in the ocean. And she's the daughter of a Chinese emperor who fled to escape her stepmother. And she married a Japanese prince and founded like the Kono clan. So like there's aspects of it that are kind of similar to this like older story, because an important part of the Utsuro-Bune is that like she might be like a princess from a foreign land that's like I don't know, immigrated into Japan. And like I guess the Utsuro-Bune story is like almost like a parody of like this older one, where instead of like taking the girl in, they cast her out back into the ocean. And a big part of the story is that like the Japanese writers of that time, like Bakken is one of the writers, the one in 1825. He like explicitly states that like this is a woman from like the West. Like this is something that he states where he thinks that like she's either a British, Bengali, or American princess. And the symbols, like he writes that the symbols that were carved into the ship, that Ancient Aliens calls like hieroglyphics. He says, I found that similar characters on a British ship that recently arrived offshore in Japan, like they're similar to that. So that's why he thinks like, and it's fun if you see like Japanese art that depicts like Matthew Perry's American ships. This was later, this was a couple decades later, but if you see the art, the symbols which are probably like they're probably English symbols, but how like the Japanese artist depicted it is almost like identical to how like the authors depicted the Utsuro-Bune symbols.
Yeah.
It's very, very clear that it's not about aliens, it's about like Westerners.
Yeah, because it's also speaking to the whole story, because the 19th century in Japan, the big trend that is happening is that more and more Westerners are starting to show up in the region. They're starting to plant down more things, like they're starting to, you know, like actively colonize, like the French are starting to colonize Indochina. The British are messing around with China, and like obviously the huge British Indian colony. But like Japan, because like one of the things about Japan is that as an island nation, it has enjoyed a whole lot of independence. There are several like, you know, major legends about how like the ocean protects them from foreign invaders, but Japan is not isolated from the world. They have obviously like the ocean to protect them, but they are increasingly like, because the Europeans are in other parts, they're showing up in Japan, they're trading, they're, you know, getting more involved. And we'll see that this starts to become more and more of a big deal as Japan, essentially to try and bulwark itself against European incursion, start to go through a period where they try to become basically European themselves. And they go through this period of like rapid industrialization and centralization of the government called the Meiji period, which basically culminates in World War II. So that's a whole different story though.
There's also like a weird little thing, like, you know, the description about the woman having like white extensions to her hair, to like her red hair. It's funny, that matches a Japanese explorer's description of like Russian women at that time. So it was like a story that like a Japanese explorer brought back to Japan and was saying that Russian women did that to their hair, like they extended it with white powder or something like that. They turned it had white tips or something like that.
That's interesting. Frosted tips.
Just open up the boat and there's like Guy Fieri sitting there with the stuff.
Yeah.
Welcome to Flavor Country.
It's just a flavor country.
We were to Flavor Town, sorry.
Flavor Kingdom.
He's expanding.
There's some sort of American prince. He comes from a kingdom called Flavor Town.
A huge part of the story is the fact that it takes place in Tokugawa, Japan, too, where the borders were closed. So there was very limited contact between like West and Japan. Like they obviously knew about it, but like you have to report if like the border was broken and stuff. And that's why like when Bakken brings up like the British ships, like that's a illegal crossing of the border that was like published, and like the government had to crack down on it. So yes, there's a lot of like context in the story that I don't know, the Ancient Aliens like leaves out and stuff. A lot of times people leave out of it, like that there's pre-existing legends and that it's obviously about like foreigners, like not, I don't know, it's very weird.
Japan has also a very like complex relationship when it comes to like its relationship with people from the outside. But you're right, there's like it's this interesting like folkloric mix of like Shinto fairy tale type tropes, but also talking about like stuff that's geopolitically going on at the time and kind of concerns and anxieties that exist in Japan at the time. So it kind of all fits together.
Yeah.
And if you understand it that way, the story makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. And the thing about the story is that it kind of doesn't make any sense because each one of the different versions are contradictory to each other in some way. Like one has the date as February 22nd. Another one has it as March 24th. There's different names for the beaches in each one of the stories, and then different overlords for the province, which are weird. And if you take the time to look, this wasn't me, this was a really, really good author of a skeptical inquiry article, but he took the time to look for these beaches on like archaic Japanese maps and stuff, and then went back to see like, okay, who was the overlord of this kingdom or this province, which one of them was like Ugusara Izumi or something like that. And if you actually take the time to actually parse out the story and like double check all the factoids in it, like the beach doesn't appear on any maps. And then the overlord who they named, all his territories are inland. They don't have a beach. So there's no way for there to have been a beach for anybody to land on. So like there's obviously...
Oh my gosh.
The Japanese version of Ohio.
Yeah.
It's like somebody made it up. Like I think it's pretty certain that somebody made up the story, but was smart enough to like make sure that like certain details were like at least somewhat believable, but like you take a little deep look into it. Yeah. So I don't know. There's another aspect of it too, where like, did the story even happen? Is a thing.
We'll delve into that. So another part that like kind of makes us fit into Japanese fairy tales is also the act of returning the woman to the sea is reminiscent of several Japanese myths, because the idea is that a lot of these stories, these encounters with supernatural creatures ends with them returning the creature to the place where it belongs and sort of setting right the natural order of things. Things like the end of Princess Mononoke or something like that, right?
Sure.
Putting the thing that was taken erroneously back to where it belongs.
Put it back. Give it
If I remember
back.
correctly, there's actually in that movie, there is like a part of a yokai being kept in a box.
In a box, yeah.
And that needs to be returned. And like that's like the big turning point in the movie.
Yep.
So the other part too is that like Japanese folktales often serve as cautionary tales or moral lessons. And in this one, I think the idea is that like there's a big part in like Japanese mythology of like, don't fuck with things that you don't understand.
Yeah.
Which I really wish politics streamers would enjoy, which would do. We haven't fucked around with politics debate streamers yet, so I'm gonna put my stake there and be like, yeah, maybe don't debate a topic in front of thousands of people if you're going to be live streaming yourself reading the Wikipedia article on the topic in like the minutes before you're about to go live with it. Maybe it means that you haven't read enough to talk about that subject.
Could the moral of this tale be when you see a woman, just like let her do her thing. Don't interfere. Just let a woman do her thing. Just like let her go. Let her do her thing.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of fun context, but I want to get to some juicy debunking, Tristan. I want to get to some juicy debunking of this story. Can we do that?
Well, first, we need to make some money.
We need to make some money. Yeah.
We need to make some money. So first, a little message from our sponsor, us. All right. Are you ready for more debunking?
I want to get to some debunking. I want to dunk on ancient aliens. Hit me with it.
All right. So let's first do the context of the creation of this story. As Trey mentioned, there's 4 different copies of where this thing is. Each have their own interpretation and contradictory like stories, being the Oshushuzaki, which is translated as Miscellaneous Notes from the Nightingale Inn, which came out in 1815. Toen Shosetsu, which is translated as Tales from the Rabbit Garden, which was compiled in 1825 by Kyokute Bakin and is currently on display at the Mukyukai Toshokan in Machida in the Tokyo Prefecture. The Horyo Kishu, which is Diaries and Stories of Castaways, which came out in 1835, has an unknown author and is today at display in the library of the Tenri University in Tenri, Syria, and Nara Prefecture. And Ume no Chiri, Dust of the Plum, which came out in 1844.
Dust of the Plum.
Nagahashi Matajiro, and is today on display in the Iwasi Bunko Toshokan, which is a private library in Nara City.
You did so good just then with all those pronunciations.
I beg to differ. So first, let's talk about the language barrier. They're saying that, like, it's unidentifiable hieroglyphics, but it could also mean that it is stuff from another country rather than another planet. As Trey pointed out, that it was almost definitely a reference to the sort of inscrutability of, European alphabets and just like not knowing what the language is, because one of the reasons why I think it looks so alien and weird to the primarily American conservative Western audience of like Ancient Aliens is because it is a non-Western culture that does not have Western cultural context, which is hard to come by in our day and age because of how much we love to export our culture and society to other people, whether they like it or not. This is like one of those like interesting, rare glimpses of seeing Western society through a lens of people who don't have the context of understanding the culture. And you can kind of see like parts of it and how to a lot of these people, we would come off as very alien.
We would be very alien
as their first encounter.
Yeah.
Because you can imagine this generating from a story of like some sort of like, dinghy that got marooned and wound up in some like really remote fishing village with a bunch of people who had never seen a Westerner before. And it like blew their minds because they're like, this alien basically wandered on shore.
We joked about it, but literally imagine that we just threw Guy Fieri out into a place that didn't understand Guy Fieri. And it was just like, try to make sense of this person. Yeah. We barely do. Yeah.
The other thing, too, as I mentioned, that the boat and the woman's appearance are described in terms that are familiar to the Japanese of that era, and likening the boat shape to a Japanese incense burner. So, like, there's as I just did previously, there's a whole like cultural understanding of this story that makes a lot more sense if you know the geopolitical, but also the folkloric and mythological concept of Japanese society, especially in the 1800s. And also not that ancient aliens people would buy into this, but the very overwhelming consensus among historians and ethnologists is that this is a piece of Japanese folklore and not factual in many ways.
Yeah.
Well, that's what the mainstream experts say.
Yeah. And the ufologists are basing their entire claim off of basically, not that this is much of a surprise, but speculative interpretation and conjecture, and in flagrant violation of Occam's razor.
Doesn't sound like them. That doesn't sound like a thing they would do.
Yeah. Also, as you actually pointed out in your video, Trey, the image of the flying saucer has been prevalent in American pop culture since the 30s, and this cultural background might influence the way that we interpret historical events like Utsuro-Bune, leading people to associate them with extraterrestrial visitations, which means that, like, hey, again, we've kind of covered this on the show before, but like a culture that doesn't know what a UFO is and see something vaguely UFO shaped would not make that connection in a way. Like, it's kind of like how in Kimbaya, with the Kimbaya artifacts, there's like this depiction of a fish that they say looks like an airplane. And it's like, well, if you've never seen an airplane before, you could make a fish in like an abstract sense that if you were to show it to a modern person, they would more associate it with an airplane than a fish, right?
Yeah. It only looks like an airplane because we know what an airplane is. Yeah.
And the other part that I think is a big deal, that I think that Trey, as a person with an archaeology background, could speak a lot more, is that if you take literally anything and remove it from its context and try to look at it with a lens that isn't trained, you are going to learn literally nothing about it.
This is 100% true. Oh gosh, this is ancient aliens in general. That's what they do. That's what they do with everything, unfortunately.
It's true. Another good example would be all of the medieval and Renaissance paintings that we talked about in previous episodes that try to depict UFOs were just not understanding the historical context of the things.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Are they clouds or are they spaceships? Well, one of them seems a little bit more likely, and of course that would be spaceships. They're obviously spaceships.
Yeah. The other thing, too, is that the sources of all of these are all folktale writers and novelists. We're kind of looking at like going back to our newsprint or engraving episode, that these people basically functioned in Japanese society at the time like tabloid news writers or tabloid stories, where they took stories maybe that were true or maybe weren't and embellished them with like supernatural aspects in order to get more popularity and sell more books.
Yeah.
Which means that the original source and the reliability of the accounts are already in question, because the kind of people that were writing about them were not people who were overly interested in telling factual stories. Either they were writing fiction or they were telling tall tales, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, especially if it was a way to get a moral across, you know, like you would embellish stuff and you would create details that would help deliver the moral that you wanted to tell. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just means that it's not necessarily an account of people who are trying to be as accurate as possible, which is fine, but it's just don't count on that to be historically accurate.
Yeah, to sort of round this out, I then looked at like what most experts who have studied this story have to say about it and what their interpretation of what it is actually is. And I came up with a handful. The first is that some historians believe that this story was a distorted account of a real event. You know, like the kind of idea of like somebody got shipwrecked and marooned or something like that, and their dinghy wandered into a remote fishing village where the people who had never seen a Westerner before like freaked out because like to them it was an alien.
Yeah.
And then of course the story could have been embellished and mythologized with a bunch of stuff that it comes from Japanese fairy tales and folklore attached to it until it became what we see today. Other ideas that it might be allegorical, representing themes like the increasingly fragile isolation that Japan was enjoying at the time, the fear of the unknown and societal change that were happening as a result of more and more Europeans. And as the world is like 1800s, you're starting to see, this is very early on, but we're starting to see a more global globalized international trade network, and like the Europeans and non-Japanese people coming and interfering more in society, and foreign influence becoming a bigger thing. And Japan had a very difficult time managing that. As you mentioned, that the beaches that were referred to were specifically ones that had been cut off from foreign trade, which the Emperor of Japan would have like actively done as a measure to sort of limit foreign influence over the country. Another theory about it is that the mysterious box could also kind of give some more talk about that, because the mysterious box usually has ominous connotations, which means that like it could be that like this is like it's playing with the idea that this is taboo or it's forbidden, or like that you are that like by us being more connected, we are starting to mess with the natural order. And because again, Japan is going through a very tumultuous time in its history at this point. The other part is that it could be part of a long story of people at sea making up weird fucking stories. You know, mermaids, ghost ships, mermaids being the very fun story of a bunch of people who went to Florida and had to make an excuse for why they had sex with a manatee and instead invented mermaids.
It's a lady. What can I say? As far as I remember, it was a lady.
I wish that was a joke, but that is a very reasonable theory about why we have mermaids, is that people wrote about them having sex with manatees and decided to reinterpret it as mermaids.
Oh no.
That's
Good. That's no good.
Because apparently manatees, you know what? I don't think we need to go into that.
Manatees got it going on. You can say it. You can say it. They got curves in all the right places. You can say it. Be brave, Tristan.
They have fairly compatible organs, is what I would say.
Okay. Interesting.
Oh my God.
I don't know.
You ever see a manatee's toenails?
Oh, no.
Manatees have toenails?
I don't think I want to.
They look like elephant toenails. They look if you look them up, they're on their little front flippers. They look like elephant toenails.
Oh,
they're close relatives. It's crazy.
Oh my goodness. We're learning a lot today.
Yeah. There's also like a psychological or sociological way to look at it. Some theories think that it might have been created to cope with the phenomenon that were not understood at the time. Things like cultural differences or mental illness.
Yeah. Guy Fieri.
That this could be some sort of political or diplomatic work. There's one theory that posits that the story is a distorted account of a political or diplomatic incident, perhaps involving a foreign dignitary or a ship from another country, and that the story might have been tweaked and altered in order to protect identities or to serve as propaganda for the empire at the time. Then there's also the fact that it could be multiple different stories being kit-bashed together, which often happens in folklore stories. Utsuro-Bune could be a fusion of multiple legends or accounts, both real and imaginary, and put them all into one narrative that sort of evolves over time. This happens a lot in folklore.
Sure.
And as we've seen from multiple accounts, we know that this story was, like, because we have multiple conflicting accounts, that's usually a sign that there was multiple versions of the story floating around in the oral tradition before it was committed to writing.
Writing it down.
Usually. I don't know. We have an actual archaeologist here, so I'm feeling kind of intimidated when I make these kind of declarative statements.
No, don't feel intimidated. I'm an archaeologist of three dig sites, so I'm not that experienced.
But you've taken actual archaeology classes when I took only history classes, because my school did not even have an archaeology department.
Damn. Oh, you're doing good. No, you're doing great. I see no problems. You're awesome.
Excellent.
Awesome. And then, of course, the other theories show that there's a distinct possibility that the story has religious or spiritual basis to it, representing divine visitation or a test of virtue for the fishermen in the community, which is, of course, a common aspect of Japanese fairy tales. And even though it's it's a modern, from their perspective, modern story of the same thing, that it has a lot of the aspects of ancient Japanese fairy tales that were kind of being cautionary or tests of virtue or things like that. So it could be trying to modernize those kinds of stories with a more modern context from their perspective, like modern as in 19th century context.
Sure.
And like I said, Japanese folklore has a rich tradition of having mysteries and beings that have supernatural abilities that we don't understand being a big part of it. So maybe we should, scrutinize sources and not take historical accounts at face value, and maybe like do a little bit more work than that. I know Ancient Aliens likes to take things that are basically folklore and take it at face value and say that it's real. Maybe that's not the best way of doing it, and employ maybe just a tiny bit of critical thinking to these things.
Maybe.
Tristan, you're asking Ancient Aliens to do like the bare minimum of history, of a show on the History Channel to do the bare minimum of looking at history, because that's the whole point of history, is to look at these things.
I read an article a little while back that talked about how a lot of Ancient Aliens segments on a certain subject can be instantly traced back to like the top 2 results on Google for that topic.
Oh my God.
So, of course, no episode of It's Probably Not Aliens would be complete without me making you sad somehow.
Do it.
And I think that an important part to talk about with this in the context of Ancient Aliens, Ancient Astronaut Theorists talking about this, I kind of alluded to it when I talked about how Ancient Aliens' viewer base is a predominantly conservative, Western sort of group. You know, a lot of these have connections to the weird far right, but we're not going to talk about that today. The big thing that I could talk about is that talking about Utsuro-Bune being an extraterrestrial event is basically cultural appropriation. It's exploitation and misunderstanding of real cultural heritage, reframing it as an alien encounter, which completely ignores that Japan has a rich tapestry of folklore and history that just gets reduced to a mere footnote in this speculative, as we explained, Trey's video is the only non-UFO interpretation of this story on YouTube, or at least the only big one. I'm sure there's more because there's infinite videos on YouTube. But
sure,
the fact that like this part of Japanese folklore that has history, tradition, myth, legend, history, is reduced to aliens.
Yeah.
And the story is deeply embedded in one culture, taken out of context to serve a different agenda, which is basically, that could be the title of Ancient Aliens.
Yeah.
No, whenever you have to talk about Ancient Aliens, you have to like, it's like literally you have to say that over and over and over again. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah. It's ridiculous.
Lastly, when we allow for such theories to dominate discourse, we lose the nuance and complexity that comes with cultural stories and histories. The Utsuro-Bune story is part of Japanese folklore and can teach us much about the people and the times in which it was created. We already learned a whole lot about Japan today from this one story. Reducing it to alien encounter kind of robs us of the opportunity to understand and appreciate it in its full context. For example, if you were interested in Japanese folklore and you found about the story and then you tried to look up stuff to learn more about it in its context, instead, you're going to have to sift through a giant pile of UFO people trying to willfully misunderstand Japanese culture in order to make the claim that it is intelligent aliens that somehow came from light years away and managed to land on Earth at superluminal speeds without, of course, destroying half the planet in the process. And the first thing they decided to do was show up in some random tiny village in Japan floating on the water.
But like, isn't that, and I know the answer is like, obviously no, considering the state of things, but like, isn't that boring though? To just like, to boil everything down to, I bet it was aliens, rather than like, what about learning about like the cool nuance and context about the cultures and the time period and things like that, just to take everything and be like, but it was probably aliens though. And I know that I guess to some people that's not boring, that's interesting to be like, oh, but how does this alien encounter connect to these other ones from around the world that we definitely also believe in? But like, to me, it's like, I don't know, it's so boring to just take every interesting thing and be like, aliens. It was aliens.
It speaks to a sort of colonial nature as well. Trey could probably speak to this too, as someone who has been in, and I imagine this is similar in archaeology as it is in history. But I found with my colleagues, especially in undergrad, but because in grad school, everyone just becomes very specially interested in one very narrow topic. But I found in history when I was an undergrad, I was shocked by how many people were really into history, really into understanding the past, but had a genuine, huge disinterest in anything that was outside of essentially Europe and North America. Like they just did not care. It was not not a thing that interested them at all.
That's a huge problem.
How often do those people think about the Roman Empire?
A lot. Those are the people who are thinking about the Roman Empire every day. But like, because like I remember when I went to the university that I went to, I was interested in this is kind of like a sad. I kind of mentioned that I talked about that I was into doing Mesoamerican stuff until I couldn't, and I'll tell you the reason why. When I went to do history, I was interested in studying pre-Columbian Mesoamerica, specifically the Triple Alliance around Tenochtitlan and Mexico and everything like that, especially their spiritual worldview and everything like that. When I arrived at university, I was first confronted with the fact that, one, we do not have an archaeology department, so you'd have to transfer universities if you wanted to study that subject. Two, you would need to learn Nahuatl, a language that you could only really learn by taking a program in Mexico. If you wanted to do that, you'd have to go through a program at the University of Chicago, which anybody in history will know is basically like the best university in like one of the best universities in the world when it comes to history. So that would be the only path for me to be able to learn the language that I would need to learn in order to do that thing. And then third, that if I wanted to go to grad school for the subject, pretty much everybody who was working on this subject in English was entirely focused on post-colonial Mesoamerican history and studying like the Spanish conquest and basically Spanish Mexico. Unless I wanted to go to UNAM, which is the Universidad Nacional Autonomous de Mexico, which is like a humongous university in Mexico City, and I think it's one of the oldest universities in like the Western Hemisphere, but it's entirely in Spanish. And if I did not have, I was learning Spanish, but if I did not have like fluent Spanish, you would not be able to go to university in a language that you're not fluent in, right?
No.
So then I realized that it would just be easier for me to focus on America instead and focus on digital stuff. And so I kind of had to give up on that dream.
It's never too late.
It is never too late, but I also am turning 35 in 2 months and I have a almost 2-year-old. So I feel like any big ventures back to school would be having to do with a lot of consideration.
Tricky. Well, I learned a lot today, and I appreciate that.
I'm very proud of this one. And Trey, you made it so much better. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for being here.
So first things first, if you like this episode and you want to tell us how much your male partner thinks about the Roman Empire, please tweet us at @props.aliens on Twitter X Twitter.
Yep.
Twitter.
That's the one. And I think we have a blue sky.
Or props.aliens on Blueski.
Yep. On Blueski. And Trey, thank you so much again for being here. This was so much fun. We love having you on. And where can people find more of your stuff online?
Oh, they could look me up on YouTube. Trey the Explainer should pop up, and then on Twitter, Trey_explainer. I think my thing is. Twitter, I mostly do thirst trap.
Yeah, Trey's YouTube presence and Twitter presence could not be more different. So if you want to learn about like archaeology and history and like all that kind of cool stuff, and also like a little bit of cryptids and paleontology and the older stuff, if you want to get all that stuff, go to Trey on YouTube. If you want to hear stories like, hey, remember the time that I matched with somebody on Tinder in the Vatican? That's where you go to Trey on Twitter.
Oh man!
Oh, amazing. Those worlds colliding is crazy. When I get 1 million, they might merge. I don't know. We'll see the dimensional merge. I don't know.
Heck yeah! Tristan, where can people find more of your stuff online if they want to hear your thoughts?
Oh boy, if that's a thing you want after hearing all this, you can go to Step Back on Nebula and on YouTube. Like my thing is all about trying to understand how the world works by, looking at the past and kind of doing what I'm doing here. But kind of with more of a turn on like conspiracy theories and like challenging the American far right and terrorism and all that kind of stuff, because that's just the stuff that I spent way too much time destroying my mental health studying as a grad student.
I hear you clacking away on your keyboard. I wonder what that's about.
Scott, if I wanted to learn about the L conspiracy in the Superman comics, where would I go?
That's a good video. That's from like what, 2017, 2018?
Maybe.
That's a good video. That's my YouTube channel, Nerdsync, Nerdsync. If you want to learn how Superman is tied to a lot of like Jewish culture, that's what that video is really about. And it's really fun. And I make videos all about comics and cartoons and movies and things like that, and using them to teach about real world history, philosophy, culture, and art. It's a lot of fun. And sometimes I just goof around. I'm working on a video right now about how there was a strike in 1971 where people in Scotland, like 30,000 children in Scotland went on strike to
That's where Scott's from.
Yeah, that's where I'm from. I'm from Scotland. And all these children went on strike to save Scooby-Doo from being taken away from the BBC. And I just thought that was
goodness.
I just thought it was a fun story considering all the strikes going on. And so that's
underrated, amazing type of Nerdsync video is when you show that you have this really deep interest or really deep knowledge of the business of how the comic books were made.
Yeah.
Like when you get into like the real gritty about like different artists and creators and such like that really cool stuff.
Thank you.
I guess I also didn't mention that I have video, like my by the time this comes out, my video should be about American propaganda and how the US uses money and influence to basically keep supporting capitalism around the world.
That's awesome.
Speaking of capitalism, if you want to help us pay mortgages and eat food, you could sign up for Nebula at nebula.tv/probbynotaliens. And if you sign up through that, part of your membership of Nebula for as long as you stay a member directly helps us out. And you will get
helpful
episodes early, Scott.
Theoretically, I'm working on it.
Theoretically.
Thank you to everyone who writes reviews of the show on Apple Podcasts and all the people who respond to Q&As on Spotify. We got to figure out how to like actually utilize that, but everyone keeps responding to stuff on Spotify. And I'm like, that's awesome. Thank you for doing that. And thank you for telling your friends about this show. That's how the show grows. It's just word of mouth. Really great place to send people is a website, probsnotaliens.com. Very simple. It's got links to everything over there. So go check it out.
Yeah, that's all the things.
That's all the things. So until next time, my name is Scott Nicewander.
Oh, my name's Trey, and thank you.
And I'm Tristan, and the truth is out there. Probably. I didn't know what to do with that one. I got.
We're running out of ways for you to say the word probably at the end of the show. I have said
probably 90 something different ways now, and I don't know how I'm going to keep doing it.
Hundreds of times.